welcome everybody. Really delighted that you're joining us on this webinar. Really great to have you all here, and we've got a fantastic panel, hopefully going to have a really interesting and insightful conversation. This is going to be very informal, very exploratory. We're going to actually test out a scenario of using discovery partway through the session as well. And we'd love it if you would say hello on the chat, start your own conversation, share resources, ask questions, but just get involved through the chat. And you know, it's really nice if we can get people participating as well, because I know just from seeing who's popping onto the webinar, we've got a whole ton of experience in the audience as well. So welcome everybody. This webinar is part of a series of 4. It's called Discovery of User Needs in Digital Health, Why Bother? And we're going to attempt to make the case to you over the next hour and a half that you definitely should bother. We think it's really important, and we're going to explain why. But before we get into any more detail in introducing the panel members today, I'd like to invite Professor John Clark just to say a little bit about the programme that this is part of, and then we'll do some wider introductions. So over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. I'm John Clark. I'm technically left to my own devices. I'm Professor of Computer and Information Security at the University of Sheffield. That's literally, I do things like IoT, obviously in IoT security. But I'm actually here today as the PI, the Principal Investigator for the Pitch-In Consortium. So Pitch-In is funded by Research England, and it's part of the Connected Capabilities Fund. And it's essentially, we're trying to create better ecosystems and promote innovation in IoT, particularly involving the university sector, and in the case of Pitch-In, us at Sheffield, Newcastle, Cambridge and Oxford in particular as part of that programme. So it's about £4.93 million over just over 3 years from Research England, plus leverage. We're probably up to about 8 million in total. There's a lot to be said for this. Our sectors are manufacturing, cities, energy and health, and a little bit of a meta theme, which is essentially managing the introduction of IT. Now, health is actually very important to us, because if you look at the initiatives which are actually emerging at the moment, if you look at the societal problems we have, COVID-19, changing demographics for health, demographics for social care, the environment, etc., etc. There's a big health strand which sort of permeates many of our major themes, and so I'm really glad that health has been a major part of the work so far. So it's really quite exciting. I think the future for health research, particularly with IoT, which is of course where we start from, is very rosy. There's a lot of opportunities for remote services, for IoT in particular, to play a part in quality service provision, which is both high quality but also efficient. And it's okay. So we're also actually gearing up. So that's the past, if you like. About a quarter of the spending has been spent on health, just slightly under. But the future, we're looking to create a centre for a connected, resilient society, which will involve health, energy, cities, concerns about the environment involving IT, but much wider. It's much wider than IoT. So in a sense, it started with our engineering heartlands, but it's the next evolution is going to be much bigger. So it's going to be involve the social sciences in particular, and engineering and science. So we're looking for doing something much bigger than Pitch-In. We have a follow-on proposal into Research England at the moment for a year to investigate this very possibility. And health is an important part of that, because health seems to permeate many of our interests, but certainly in manufacturing, where we're looking at manufacturing for health in terms of coping with pandemics. We've been doing work in hospitals of a variety of forms, energy, the environment, green space management and things like this. Those are all sort of things which have a health element or health and well-being element to them. So great to open this workshop today. Thank you for having me, for want of a better phrase. And I look forward to seeing more of the health people, the health and well-being people in any future programs with which we're involved. As I say, we'll find out, I would imagine, about the one-year follow-on, which is looking at Connected Resilient Society very shortly. And if that doesn't come up, we'll do Connected Resilient Society with a significant involvement in some other way. So I think with that, I'll say thanks for listening. Thanks, and Pitch-In. We've been really happy to support the work that's actually been going on, and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate your contribution, and we're really delighted to be part of the Pitch-In programme. this webinar came about through Kat Easton, who's one of the panel members, and myself chatting with each other, Kat's waving, about and sort of scratching our heads really about how challenging it can be in the digital health sector for academia, for the NHS and third sector and industry, startups, SMEs to work together. And we were mulling over all the learning that we've gained over the years and the challenges that we still sort of experience. And we thought, why don't we have some of these conversations in public with some really interesting people who have got a lot to say on the matter. So that was sort of the genesis of this series of 4 workshops and then the hacks that are going to follow. My name's Victoria and I am part of the Mindwave team. And so Mindwave is a digital health SME. We're a spin out from South London and Maudsley Biomedical Research Centre. Our founder has a games industry background. When he was a non-exec director at SLAM, he saw the opportunity, because they would do some really good work around personal health records, to create a spin-out company. So we've been around for 6 years now. I've been involved in Mindwave for the last year or so. We're really interested in how you do design, discovery, user research, and build digital tools, products and services that people actually want and are going to use and are going to make a difference in practice. And I guess that's the end goal, isn't it? That's what we're all here for, and that's what we're all interested in. That's a little bit about Mindwave and a little bit about the background to the webinar. Okay, so what even is discovery? Because discovery is a bit of jargon, and we are all very familiar with our own jargon in our own sectors, but it can be a bit confusing when we cross the two together. And I'm aware that the people on the audience today have a real mix of backgrounds. So some of this might be really obvious to you, but it might be very unobvious to another person and vice versa. So I guess we just need to bear that in mind. But really, discovery is about that process of discovery. It's about understanding and researching people's needs, but not only their needs, their aspirations, their goals, the problems they're trying to solve in their life, and then looking at how services can improve. And often that involves technology, but not also to meet their needs better. The reason why discovery is important is it helps you commission, it helps you design, it helps you develop better tools and services to meet people's needs. Now, my background's in patient and public involvement, and back in the day when I did PPI, we never really did anything around user needs. We tended to involve people in more formal processes. We tend to ask their views in committees, in questionnaires, in surveys, in focus groups. But actually, discovery is a much more co-creative process, which I found really fascinating. And in the very early days, I just want to say why this is a topic personal to me. In the very early days, when I first started out in digital health back in sort of 2013, I was really blown away by discovery and user research. And I have to confess, we did a few projects where we didn't involve people, and they were the projects that were the least successful projects. So that's why this is personal to me, because it's something I really care about. So this is our fabulous panel. I'm going to ask Ilse, I've just asked you to unmute. I'm going to ask Ilse just to introduce herself.
Hello everyone, my name is Ilse Parry. I'm a user researcher at Mindwave. I've worked with Mindwave for the last 2 years approximately. I was the first user researcher to join the team, and I care about the topic because my background is in industrial design. Prior to becoming an industrial designer, I did work in a healthcare setting as a care assistant in various nursing homes whilst I was studying, and decided that when I became an industrial designer, I wanted to design products to help older people. So I've witnessed firsthand some of the difficulties that come along with that when you're creating physical products. And it was kind of a natural progression for me to move into digital. So yeah, my focus is very much about the person who uses the product and what they gain or don't gain from the thing that they have.
Thank you, Ilse. And Ilse is going to bring really help us understand sort of how the discovery process works from a tech company point of view, and then we'll look at how that might play out in an academic environment. And talking of academic environments, I'd like to invite Kat to introduce yourself. Kat, tell us a bit about you and why this is personal for you.
So I'm Kat Easton. I'm a lecturer at Sheffield University. Social psychologist by background, and Over the past kind of 15, 16 years, I've worked a lot with industry and in the charity sector to basically try and empower people and give them a voice. So I'm less interested in the kind of tech elements as such. It's just a mode of delivery for me. I'm interested in the human side of things, and I'm passionate about user design or discovery, because I want to give people that voice and a choice in their care, and a say right from the outset in how their health is supported and managed.
Thank you, Kat. That's lovely. Jo, can I invite you to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about why this topic is personal to you?
So yeah, I'm a design engineer and academic at Sheffield University in a group called Lab for Living. And I've been working in the space, this area, for roughly 10 years, I guess. Like Catherine, I guess I've got a bit more of an interest in the process and the human side of this. So the technology itself, I will confess, I'm perhaps a bit of a Luddite. I don't assume that the digital is always going to be the solution. I sort of start from a blank sheet with people and work with them to identify what their needs are and the ideal response for them, which may or may not be digital. So my interest is really on how people are engaged in these processes, non-technical people, non-academic people, people for whom this world of innovation, research and design may be a bit alien. So how they can be empowered to sort of share their thoughts and ideas and really contribute to the process. And how design practices specifically can support and enable that to happen.
Thank you for that introduction, Jo. And I think your point about jumping straight to the solution is an endemic sort of problem and challenge we have within the digital health sector, and I think that's something we're going to unpick over the course of the next hour and a half or so. Now, last but absolutely 100% not least is Kate Allett. So, Kate, introduce yourself.
Hello. I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Kate, and I'm an inspirational speaker. I talk specifically on resilience and thriving, and especially with the NHS now. Published author. I had a brainstem stroke 11 years ago, which is why I do what I do now, and I've become this global advocate for stroke rehab around the world. I set up charities. I'm a grippable rehab ambassador, and I just take huge interest. I hang out in lots of spaces where users that you were talking about will benefit from what's produced from all you fabulous people. I talk to them all the time, and through these private Facebook groups, and find out from the horse's mouth what really works, what people need, what people struggle with, what people have, the things they've done really well during lockdown, for example, on their own without having access to the gym. So I feel I've got an awful lot to offer. But the reason why I got interested in this particular discovery project is because I've always been interested in research. And very quickly, 11 years ago, experimentally, the OTs used electric stimulation on my left arm that didn't move for 6 months, nor did my whole left side. And bizarrely, it came back to life. And I always believed that could help other people. So, what I did, I do things differently. I tweeted an OT researcher at Nottingham University. And within 6 months of that tweet, we put together a £250,000 package of funding from the NIHR. And that has been published 2 years ago, because I believe that could help other people. So I've always been interested in, and is helping other people. So that's why I'm here, basically.
Thank you very much, Kate. You are a force of nature, and we're really lucky to have you here with us this morning. So thank you so much for your involvement. Okay, so I have just put on the chat. I've just asked if people could maybe say a bit about their motivation for being here or why they care about this topic. It would be lovely to hear from people, and it helps us shape our conversation as well. So it would be fabulous if people could just maybe put a sentence or two on the chat as we go through. just in terms of the session, we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction to discovery, and particularly how discovery and user research is done within our company at Mindwave. It's not always the same everywhere, so this is just our take on it, but it gives you a flavour, and you might have different approaches you want to share. We're then going to go through some case studies just very briefly and talk about different people's experience of undertaking user research and discovery. And then we're going to use a stroke survivor scenario and use a Miro board and just sort of illustrate the thinking process behind planning a piece of discovery, because we thought that might be quite a nice thing to do, and it can also show you about how this stuff can be done online. Now we're in pandemic days, just in case you haven't experienced that before, and then we'll have a bit of time for question and answers, and we'll finish. So please get involved, start a question amongst yourselves. Ask questions in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on it, and let's get into the webinar for real. Ilse and I between us are just going to give a really broad sort of introduction to the digital design process and where user research and discovery fits into it. And you know, all of this is contested. Everyone's got different views and opinions and different ways of doing this. And I myself am a complete pragmatist, so I don't feel like we need to, you know, have really set patterns. But broadly, we tend to start with discovery and user research. So that's creating a hypothesis, testing it, seeking to understand that we are meeting the needs that we think we are, and the hypotheses are correct. Then we would move into an alpha phase where we might start to design something. We might create designs and wireframes, they're sometimes called. So you're not doing any coding, but something looks like a website or an app. Then you go into beta and you start actually building stuff, and you're testing, iterating all the time. And even when you go live, you're still doing that testing. And maybe for another webinar, we're not going to look at that sort of that bit of the process so much today, but actually in future webinars, we're going to really see how you need to be practicing for live right at the point when you're doing the discovery, because if you're not thinking about onboarding and implementation and adoption right from the outset, then you're going to get into trouble as well. But anyway, for the purposes today, we're sticking with discovery. So I'm going to invite Ilse just to say a little bit about the Government Digital Service design principles, and then each of the panel, if you could just be having a look at the principles and maybe just pull out one that means resonates in particular for you. But Ilse, over to you.
Thanks, Victoria. Many of you on this call are probably very familiar with these, so hope I'm not, you know, going over old ground for many people. The thing with the Government Digital Service principles is that they are guiding principles. Not all projects will include all of the aspects in how we deliver, but there are some fundamental things that we do need to consider. Empathy, I would say, is the key factor in any sort of discovery or user testing. To be able to get into the mindset of the person who is experiencing the product that you are trying to create is absolutely fundamental. And also to bear in mind that what people ask for isn't always what they need. I think that is really important. The users that we design for don't have design experience. They may jump to conclusions that are not necessarily the right answer. And to be able to draw out what it is in their life and in their personal experience that could make a difference in what we create is the skill in being a user researcher. Doing less, so not reinventing the wheel every single time. If something there is a template for us to use when we are undertaking user research, then we should use it. And we should avoid guesswork wherever possible. Making it simple, you know, an easy thing, but making something simple to use is much harder. How we can break things down and make sure that things are intuitive for different types of users is the real challenge for user researchers. And we can do the hard work through iteration, starting small, and where we do make errors and where we do make errors of judgment and where we don't fully understand something, we can create a version, test it out, try it again, and make sure that it works. We're building for needs and not audiences. So we do need to make sure that needs are met at every point. We're designing for people, not screens. So when we talk about design, we don't need to be thinking about always the layout, the typography, the colours. Those things are important, and especially when we consider accessibility, I think those something we should have in the forefront of our mind. But it is about people's lives and what they've gone through, and what tools they need from a functional perspective that we should be really focusing on here. Consistency, again, when we talk about user interfaces, we do need to consider consistency. Where we would imagine a burger menu would be placed, for example, on a mobile screen, would be the top corner. If we know that that is a standard, then why change it? If people would intuitively go to the top corner to look for the menu to be able to navigate the site, then we don't need to, as we said in one of the earlier points, to reinvent the wheel. Let's stick with what we know. And also making things open. We have a responsibility as designers, user researchers, to continually raise the bar and to be able to share what we've learned to make things better.
Thank you, Ilse. Kate, what out of those, what's the one that resonates?
Right, I'm so glad
I know which one it is.
yeah, I've got so much to say, but I'm going to illustrate my point with this. I completely agree. It's not what people ask for, because what people ask for isn't necessarily what they need. And this happened to me just last week. I asked all my closed Facebook groups, joke Facebook groups, how important animal therapy was to them. And they must all be dog lovers, stroke survivors or cat lovers, because without a question, the plethora of responses and then photographs of pets, it was incredible. But what was even more incredible was the number of people who said animal therapy would really, really help them, but they couldn't clean up after it. And that was the reason. So to completely illustrate this point, I asked the question, that from that question came out a need that I thought, well, that's really interesting, because animal therapy, in absence of a lot of mental health services now, could be something really important. But the barrier to having a dog or a cat was cleaning up after them. So
thank you, Kate. That's a really good illustration of something that might make sense on the surface. Once you dig into it, starts to become a little bit more complex. Kat, what resonates for you though? If you had to pick one of those out, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that to Kate as well. Robot dogs, then. That's where Sheffield Robotics comes in, isn't it? With their robot dogs.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway.
I've got 3. I'm greedy all the time. So
brief, then,
don't reinvent the wheel is a massive one.
Yeah. We're
spending public money on research, and it would be silly to keep either trying to outdo the competition or have this ego whereby you want to create something for people that is novel and brand new. So whenever I do projects, I always start with like a rapid review to find out what we already know in terms of qualitative evidence of lived experience, and where we're at with the technical side of things. So don't reinvent the wheel is a massive one for me. So make things simple. I can't stand jargon, and I'm sure I'll do a bit of it, but you're talking about making things simple with the design, but I also think about making things really simple when you talk to people. It is a huge thing for me, because there's always that power differential when you're working with across different sectors and groups. And so I just think keep it simple with the language is really important. And then that iteration, that fast-paced iteration that's so hard for academia to do. Yeah. But when I've worked with different startups, there's been times when I'm feeding back information from users, and the product's being developed week by week, and I'm getting new versions every other week, and it's so fast-paced, but it's really necessary. So I think those 3 for me really
Thank you,
stand out.
I think you've highlighted a really important issue that maybe we'll come back to, which is about how sort of like a small company or startup might work, particularly if they're using these sort of processes, and then how an academic institute might work, or even an NHS organisation that's really used to big waterfall project management. And this is quite a different discipline, and actually getting all of those things lined up can be a really challenging thing to do. Joe, what out of all of those resonates for you? I've just asked you to unmute.
So, like Kat, I think many of them, all of them, resonate for me. I'm going to just pick on the understanding context, because I think there's, wrapped up in that notion of context, there's some really interesting things. So in one sense, it can be just a kind of concrete passive thing, like the physical environment in which someone lives. But actually at another level, it's a really dynamic sort of conceptualization to do with the resources that people have available to them, both the inner resources, their ability to or desire to sort of take on new technology, the family or environment in which they have, the people that support them within their kind of immediate environment and their wider network of support, organizations that are available to them, financial resources that are available to them, time that's available to them. All of that can be wrapped up in this more complex notion of what context is. And I think relating to this specific kind of webinar, the really important part for us, or one of the really important parts for us in terms of the discovery, is really trying to understand that context, that kind of more complex nature of context for individuals, and how that varies across different people, because this relates directly to what sort of solutions or interventions might work best for them, each of them as individuals, and what parts of that can be scaled across for numbers of different people. So there's this idea of things that can work at scale and things that can be kind of personalized and made individual for each individual person. And I think that's in terms of the kind of discovery phase, I think that begins for me to tie together some of the issues of, you know, the individuals, people, and their very specific needs, along with where these things are happening and where they're being used, and the ability of an organization to respond. So whether that's the NHS or a startup company or an academic organization, their ability to respond to those needs and those individuals.
Thank you, Joe. And Ashlyn on the chat has sort of said, you know, how tricky it can be capturing some of that context, and that might be something we want to come back to. And I think sometimes when we're designing services and products from the NHS, from the inside out, if you like, we tend to only think about the time that people are spending in that NHS service, and not the fact that 99.9% of people's time is spent, you know, at home, at school, at work, wherever it might be. And so I guess understanding the nuances of context of people's everyday lives, not when they're in touch with services, is absolutely vital. Listen, thank you so much, everybody, for that. And we've got some really nice sort of comments in the chat as well. So thank you for getting stuck in, everybody. Really appreciate it. Should we move on? So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to invite Ilse to talk about 3 different phases of discovery. So we're getting into some quite practical things now. And again, this is very much how Mindwave works. It's aligned to the GDS and the NHS digital standard principles, but you know, everyone does it in different ways, so or has different takes. So please do contribute if you've got other approaches. But we're going to break this down into sort of planning, doing the user research, and then sort of evaluating, going on to the next stage. So if we could have the next slide, Ilse, do you want to just talk to us about the very, very important part of planning?
Yeah, sure. Hi again, everyone. As Victoria said, this is only how we do it at Mindwave, and even though the previous slide makes this look like a very linear pattern that we take, there is some empirical aspects to how we dip in and out of different parts of the discovery phase. The planning section that we see on the current slide is generally what we do first. That is the exception to the rule, because obviously we need to get information from the client to be able to kick off the project, to be able to ask them what the scope of the project is and how we can clearly define that in terms of budget and timescales and so on. And also to start to think from the very beginning. Sorry, Chantal, go back a slide again, please. To think from the very beginning about what the problem is that we're actually trying to solve, and not what the problem they think it is that we're trying to solve, and to get underneath some of those surface issues and start to explore from the off. It also allows us then to create this work plan and to figure out who it is we need to speak to throughout the discovery stage. So creating a stakeholder map is quite important for us at the beginning. We then generally tend to move into service blueprinting. So thinking about end-to-end process of an action within a service or an organisation, and looking at the different layers of complexity from surface to core. So as a user travels through a series of actions, what is going on surface and what is going on beneath the surface within the organisation itself. And we tend to do that as a second workshop with wider stakeholders. So rather than it just being the commissioning client, we will bring in some of the representatives of the different user groups and start to think about what those user stories might be from the very beginning. So then we move into the very important aspect, which is when we actually start to talk to the users that are involved. And we'll be thinking about their personal experiences, really. So getting into that depth of information and learning about people's lives and what they've experienced, and how we can start to connect the dots and create something that's going to help them fulfill their needs, really. And we've got on later slides some examples of how we've been doing that pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, but it doesn't need to stop is the point, and it shouldn't stop. Where we are limited, we can find ways to still get that vital information. So when we do meet up with users, we always do experience mapping, where we get them to lay out a scenario in their daily lives, depending on what the project is. And we'll pick out some pain points that they experience and things that work well, and maybe some accessibility needs through that as well. And we explore their journey through a service and start to build on what we understand from the journey that they described. And we can even start to iterate within the discovery phase and come up with ideas and discuss them whilst in the workshop to validate the direction of our thought process, really. We also then build in some desk research to again validate the direction and think about what's going on in the wider context of the project itself, what other people are doing, what we might need to consider that didn't come about from the workshops and experience mapping. And then start to build that into a report through evaluation. So within our discovery reports, obviously there's the analysis of all of the feedback. And again, we can show you some examples of that when we get onto the case studies. We've tended throughout the pandemic to use Miro for this and post-it notes, which is a lot of fun, really easy to use. And it allows us to do that in a very dynamic, collaborative way. So we'll have several members of the team analysing the feedback together and bringing different perspectives and challenging what one person thinks, to make sure that we're drawing the right conclusions into the high level themes. And then obviously interpreting those insights into what the plan of action is going to be, really, and how we are going to measure what our hypothesis might be, what we've discovered, how we're going to measure the impact of that going forward, and what our riskiest assumptions might be, even once the discovery is complete, that we might need to consider through to alpha.
Thank you, Ilse. So I think what Ilse set out is like a really nice sort of robust process to making sure that you're not working on hypotheses or assumptions about some sort of challenge about what do we think, what do we believe, what's actually the case. I wonder, Jo, whether you could come in and just sort of layer on this your experience. And I'm particularly interested in ethnography, actually, and how we might understand what's important to people that might be using a service or a product through sort of just spending time with people, I guess, in the places where they are.
My experiences are, as you've already said, and Ilse has already said, they're slightly different to the sort of process that you've described. We tend to base our processes on the double diamond model. So discovery, sorry, there's that interruption. Do you want to quickly go to someone else while I just address this query?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Of course, yeah. So Ilse, you're familiar with the double diamond as well, I think, aren't you? So that's sort of the design council approach, which is, I mean, and I guess this is the thing we need to think about. There's any number of models and theoretical approach, but all of them always have their sort of limitation to them, don't they? And for me, as an arch pragmatist, you pull from the bits that make sense and can be most easily deployed. Joe, I was going to go to Ilse, but you've come back. So Double Diamond, tell us a bit about that.
So in that process, the discovery phase is really focuses on trying to explore the sort of wider context and understand needs in order to define what a brief might be. So we actually don't start off with a brief necessarily. It's a very just a broad area of investigation. And in that context, the ethnographic kind of component, observations of people within their context, observations of people using things, it can be direct, but the design researchers themselves doing those that ethnography. But we've also find that in order to gather as much data as possible, we can actually send resources and tools to people. Something that's being defined as cultural probes by a guy called Bill Gavers. And they use that to collect information about their own lived experience, their own rituals and habits that accompany them wherever they are, whether it's in the school context or in the home or out in work. And they send those to us because that's a far more practical way of being able to get really deep into those sort of everyday lived experiences rather than trying to send a design researcher to a number of different places, which gets quite resource intensive. And that's something that we've found, especially as the sort of transition from pre-COVID to lockdown, is a really good way of trying to engage people within the process, because we can't always get to these meetings. Not everyone has digital access to Miro or whatever. So if we rely purely on those sort of digital platforms, we found that there is an element of exclusion. But sending people these sort of resources through the post and allowing them to do sort of auto ethnography, in a sense, their ethnography on themselves, on their own life, but providing the structure that allows them to be slightly more reflective on that, and then sending you that data back in a way that can be shared with a wider community of co-design partners. This is, I think, for us, I guess that's how we would sort of approach that ethnographic element and dimension of really getting under the lived experience of people.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Joe. And I love that sort of mix of analog and digital. And I think we'll talk a bit more about it as we go along. But we might be surprised by the people we exclude, but also surprised by some of the people we include with different methods. And for me, it's not about one method. It's about understanding who you need to involve, and then what's the best way for them, I guess, and working that out with them as much as possible. Brilliant, thank you. Let's move on, Chantal. So before we move on to a few case studies, Ilse is going to remind us of life before COVID, if we can ever remember it, and then just talk a bit about how at Mindwave we've been taking things online and some of the challenges and opportunities with that. So over to you, Ilse. Do I need to unmute you?
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I think it was really interesting what Joe was talking about there, to be able to send things out to people. That's not something that we've done to date during COVID times, but something that we should definitely be looking to do more of. For people to be able to have things to study in their own time and to reflect in a broader way, I think without the time pressure of a workshop, for example, would be really useful thing. Obviously, many of us will be familiar with this traditional workshop setup, which is highly interactive and highly engaging. And I've often found myself that when we move to online methods, it's never quite the same. I remember the first time I tried to do this, and I was doing it on one screen, and I had my screen. Could you go to the next slide, please, Chantal, just so I can show people the kind of thing. So a screen like this that the workshop will be on, which meant that then I couldn't see the faces of the people I was interacting with, and I couldn't see their names. And it was really difficult actually then to be able to build up a rapport and to get people to be able to trust you and open up to you, to be able to get to those lived experiences, as Joe mentioned. But this is how we've been doing it at Mindwave, using Miro, as been mentioned. There are other softwares that do similar things, but we found this to be the most inclusive method, because sometimes we can, if we're limited on time, it's, you know, fairly adaptable. We can do a screen share, and we can have several people on the call, moving things around, recording what people are saying, categorizing them, iterating, so on. But the second example that you see on the right hand side with the blue box, that was actually for younger people, teenagers, that particular workshop, and they were really keen to have a go on the Miro board themselves. So we gave them the link, and they were able to go in and start picking apart and analysing the designs that we put in front of them and the ideas that we were showing them. This was post-discovery phase, this was through to alpha, but it did allow them that level of interactivity with each other. So that's why I do enjoy the flexibility of this particular platform. But yeah, we're living in interesting times, and finding new and more inventive ways of doing this while we can't get together, I think is something that we should discuss a little bit further in this, for sure.
Yeah, and please, people, do share either resources, links, methods, or approaches you've been taking. I was slightly tickled looking at the diagram on the left-hand side, because it was literally in the first week or two of lockdown, we had a one-day workshop planned that Ilse and I and another colleague were running. And when I look back on it, it's ridiculous, but we took the entire whole day and took the entire day online, not realizing, of course, that would almost, you know, finish people off, even with an hour lunch break. So we learned really quickly the hard way that you can't expect people to be engaging on a call like this for any longer than a couple of hours. And the other thing I learned recently was I ran a participation workshop with trying to manage the Miro board myself, and actually it's a really skilled thing to do. So the other thing I think is really important to think about is where you're doing these online methods is making sure you've got the right resources, and it takes huge amounts of preparation, doesn't it, Ilse? Getting everything lined up and giving people a really nice, engaging experience. It doesn't just happen by itself. Yeah, okay. Can we move on, please, Chantal? So, Kate, you've already told us a little bit, but what we'd love, just for the next sort of 5 minutes, could you just really, really sort of drive home to us and explain to us why user research, from your own experience, your own campaigning work, why doing that discovery and understanding user needs is so vitally important?
Okay, no worries. I think users are vital to turn, basically, as you say, consumer needs into digital outcomes. For example, I'm going to give you an example. I was asked to take part in a focus group hosted by Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, actually, for a commercial organisation who wanted to test their phase 2, which was almost ready to go to market, some new augmented communication technology. I was invited because at one point in my illness, many years ago, I could only communicate through blinking. So, you know, there was a panel of people there invited to do this. I can't remember, you have to forgive me, I can't remember the exact reason why the product had such huge alarm bells that was ready to go to market. And really, within 10 minutes, everybody who was in the user focus group commented and threw out something that completely destroyed this project, which was ready to go to market. And it did feel at the time to all of us that it was really a tick box exercise to get the funding approved for the next phase of the project. But I will say that where I've been involved in discovery exercises, it's been phenomenal. So, for example, I worked actually with Devices for Dignity 5 years ago, on a patient-led event. And it was about trying to establish from stroke survivors what their needs were in the community. And it was an extraordinarily successful event. In fact, I'll try and post a link to the YouTube video of that particular event. And that was just superb. And it turned out some very interesting facts in terms of what people need every day to make their lives better, to be the best they can be. And that's really all we ever want to do, is just try and be the best we can be with whatever happens to us. So that was an incredible experience. And also, what I have to say, I'm going to give this example. I've been asked to be a rehab ambassador for a company called Grippable. Now they produce, they try and help people very affordably improve their upper limb function. And I said, who in their right mind refers to their upper limb? I mean, nobody does that, do they? So this is another example of discovery. I said to them, you know, one of the first things I'd say is that language is very theoretical, or it's very therapy driven. I'll ask the question, what do stroke survivors actually refer to their upper limb? And I got a huge response on these closed Facebook groups. And without a shadow of a doubt, everybody referred it, well, I'd say 80% referred to it as their weakened arm, their weakened hand, which makes sense. It's not upper limb. And you know, and taboo, other people had their own pet names for their arm that doesn't work as well as it used to work. So, you know, it's just a little example. That's the tiny example, but it's a really important example about how we use language. Going back to you, Kat, it's simple, plain English. It's, you know, you don't refer to your upper limb as your upper limb. And then I'll give you another example. In the course of doing this work, this discovery work, I asked stroke survivors, of course, I mean, we're talking thousands of stroke survivors in these loads of groups, how they're managing their spasticity during lockdown with no access to gyms and personal trainers and their therapists. And you know, and they weren't, a lot of them were going backwards to their rehab. You know, a lot of people, they can't go to the gym, so they won't go to the gym, so their exercise stops. There's a cohort of people who will see it as a challenge. There's a cohort of people who've not been able to go to work and actually have started to really ramp up their therapy again, their rehab from their stroke, because normally going to the office meant they can't work on it. So they've actually had massive improvement. But there are people that don't improve because they won't try or aren't motivated to try, for whether it's, you know, depression, loneliness, whether it's lack of dopamine, I don't know, but or just the fact they're not overly motivated people. So I put out a thing to help them. Say, look, you know, try doing a bit of stretching, with, you know, a bit more exercise. Maybe the cold is a factor. Maybe that's making your spasticity. Maybe the anxiety of loneliness and lockdown is having an effect. So I'm thinking, well, there's a need there. There's a need that people need to stretch more, perhaps, to help their wellness. And maybe there's a digital solution for that. Simply, you know, that's just another example. You know,
coming in there, that's really fascinating, because one of the things we haven't talked about is sort of peer communities, and of course there are, and again we've got to think about who's included and who's left out, but through your networks and your peer relationships and the trust you've built, I guess you're able to not just bring your own perspective, but do like check-ins with a much wider group of people who might not want to be involved in a workshop, but might just want to comment on a Facebook.
Exactly, and I'll give you one more example, because I think this is a really good example actually, and it's to do with that weakened arm idea. And I then said, my follow-up question was, not only how do you refer to it, so we're using the right language for you, it's like, why does that matter? Why does it matter to you to improve your weakened arm? And you know, and this was my motivation. My kids were 4, 8 and 10 when I had my horrible stroke 11 years ago. And my biggest motivation beyond being running again was to hug my kids. And everybody said the reason they're motivated to improve their weakened arm or hand is to hug their kids or their grandkids. And then it's interesting, I'm just going to say these facts to you. And then it was doing my hair and makeup so they can put the hair makeup up, which I then looked and found on YouTube. There was ways to put your hair up with one hand. Extraordinary, actually. And then to write and perform your personal care. A lot of guys will talk about doing DIY, driving, and even holding a pint. Those are the sort of things. That's the why. Why does it matter to have this, to spend 2 hours a day on this thing that's going to maybe help you? Well, drilling down to what the benefits are of having an improved weakened hand is something, you know, you've got to get from the horse's mouth. So it's the why. Why does it matter?
Thank you, Kate. And I think you've boiled it down, haven't you? Why does it matter? That's why we do discovery. I'm really enjoying the chat. If people are keeping an eye on it as well, and I love the point about trying a combination of Zoom and Mural with a group of older adults, and actually we were overcomplicating it. And sometimes it is like you were saying, Ilse. Sometimes when you use a platform like Mural, you can't see people's faces so easily. So we've got to. Sometimes we want to do clever, beautiful things because we can, but again, it's about fitting it to the group of people and what we want to achieve. Okay, thank you so much for that, Kate. Let's move on, Chantel. Joe, over to you. We've got a few slides for you, and we're just going to hear a few sort of case studies now from Joe and Kat about some of this in practice. So, Joe, over to you. Home-based care pathway.
Thanks, Victoria. So this was a real privilege, this project, because the lead clinician, Camille Carroll, she is a force of nature in the Southwest, and a lead for Parkinson's nationally. And she approached me with a very specific sort of idea of what she wanted, what the intervention would be. And I was very fortunate at the time to have some funding through a fellowship that allowed me to make a counter offer to her. I said to her, if you let me come down there, I won't charge you as long as you let me step back from that specification of what you think you want and start from a blank sheet of paper. And she agreed. And so she was able to bring together all of these people. I mean, this is the sort of scale of her influence, and it spans local authorities, acute services for Parkinson's, and community services. And what was really kind of blew my mind with this was that she had all those organizations involved. She had managed to get them to contribute a financial donation into a shared pot of funding. So they even had a finance officer who had a fixed budget at the start of this project that says, we don't know what we're going to do with it. That's going to come out of this co-design process, but this is the amount of money we have to spend. And that, I mean, that was just an extraordinary situation. But within this collaboration, you can see she had brought in the very first meeting we had when I went down there with some of my colleagues, there was 37 people, including this finance officer, including representations of staff from community services, acute services, local authorities, and including a significant number of people with Parkinson's and their family, friends, relatives, partners, and so on. And there was a mixture of people of different age ranges as well. So there are people with early onset Parkinson's, age 40-ish, and people, quite a lot older. So there's quite a broad spectrum. And I think that kind of context, that starting from a complete blank sheet of just working with this vast group of people to say, okay, what are your experiences now, and what would you like them to be? What would be an ideal situation for you, was really our starting point for this. Are we able to move on to the next slide? So our discovery phase took, this was all pre-COVID. So we were able to go down to visit them once a month for a period of 4 months, and had this vast process of sort of exploring the current context in which they were experiencing their Parkinson's, or experiencing providing services for people with Parkinson's, and where they wanted to be. We started off the whole process in that first meeting with something called Lego Serious Play. And this is really, really sort of useful and powerful way when you've got such diverse sort of perspectives. You've got sort of clinical expertise and professionals there, and you've got people with Parkinson's that come from a wide variety of different backgrounds. Lego Serious Play is a very powerful method for being able to bring people together in a way that everyone can understand. It forces people to use non-technical jargon and language. It forces people to use metaphor as a way of expressing not just functional and practical things, but emotions and how they're feeling as well, and how they're experiencing stuff. They were able to map out what they felt now, and then look at how they could adapt that into what they would ideally like. The following events, we went through, again, a wide array of different steps and processes, really expanding this idea of the ideal, what it would look like in reality for people. And I mean, there was a whole very common design tools that we use, so making personas, service mapping, service blueprints, and building up, but it's always doing this in very visible forms so that everyone can see what's going on. All the stakeholders have this sort of transparency of what's going on. It's not decisions made by us behind closed doors. And in between each event as well, we were sending them away to do desk research. We were sending them away to do other actions so that they had ownership of the whole process, so that when we stepped back from this, whatever was left was something that they could take forward, they could adopt, they could own. And this was really important for us in our sort of process of co-design or co-production, is that it isn't just us as experts stepping in to provide a solution that they then take over. It's something, the solution is generated together and they are part of that ownership of it. Because it's not just about the technology or about the service, it's about the behaviors of people. It's about the way that people use these things in their homes when there's no support there. And I think that building that sort of familiarity with these things starts from that engagement in the process and ownership of the process, and therefore the things that come out of it as well. Speaking of which, if we can flip on to the last slide in this little set here, at this stage, and this is an ongoing project, we're just about to apply for some funding from Parkinson's UK to do the kind of final digital manifestation of this. It's a really complex kind of intervention. There's a digital piece of technology that looks at motor symptoms for people with Parkinson's. There's an array of reflective tools that enable people to consider their emotional and non-motor symptoms, and I was surprised. In looking at the array of different symptoms that people can experience with Parkinson's, it's huge. It's way more. The kind of obvious things to do with tremor that sort of stand out, that's just a small part of the total kind of experience of Parkinson's. But supporting people in reflecting on what their non-motor symptoms as well, and documenting and recording those and tracking how they change over time. All of that's kind of embodied in these, at the moment, sort of mixture of physical resources and digital resources. And what we're moving towards now is a process of being able to refine this huge suite of resources so that people can draw on just those ones that suit them. Because we recognised in the first evaluation of this that there was too much for some people and not enough for others. And it's about being able to tailor what we provide in digital or physical forms, and whether it's the kind of full suite of resources or just little bits that work for them. So yeah, as I say, going back to the start, this was a kind of extraordinary project in many respects from my sort of portfolio of things that I've worked on, in that we had this brief given to us and I was able to make this counter offer of, no, let's start from zero. Let's start from just talking to people about what their experiences are and what they would like it to be. And that doesn't really happen very often. Even if you challenge the client on the brief, they very often don't kind of remove it entirely. They might give you a bit of scope and flexibility, but stepping away and saying, yeah, do what you like, was something I've never experienced before.
And Joe, I guess what the extension to that is that if people are less prescriptive and they allow things to emerge through a process, you end up with something. You save money in the long run, even though you have to invest up front. That would be my case. That you save money, you save time, and you actually do things better, even though you have to invest quite a bit of resource up front.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think it is more resource intensive up front, definitely. The amount of time we took in exploring, because starting anything from a blank sheet of paper is it takes a lot of trust, it takes a lot of faith. And when you've got 37 odd people at that first event and you say, we don't know where this will end up, that takes a lot of faith for them to have in you. So it's a process of building relationships as much as sort of exploring the problem and developing solutions. It's really about building relationships as well. It has to be a fundamental part of it. Yeah. And that takes time.
Thank you. And there's no shortcuts here for sure, for definite. Thank you so much for that case study, Joe. Kat, we'd love to hear from you. So obviously you've got a very different take on this because you've come from an academic background. Not that Joe hasn't, but you're coming from as a lecturer in mental health. It would just be lovely to hear a story from you about a project you've done and some learning you've had.
Well, you're saying that, but actually, some of the things that Joe has said are like words taken from my mouth with that relationship's taking time. So we'll see. There'll probably be a lot of overlap. But yeah, so this approach that I'm going to show you is one that is a little bit of a luxury academic endeavour, really, because this was the project that I want to talk about is AvaChat, which was funded by NHR, Clark, Yorkshire and Humber. And I can send links to the paper and the film that we made from this in the chat box. But this was a collaboration between Sheffield Uni and Sheffield Hallam, and some of Joe's design colleagues, Dan Woolston-Home and Cheryl Grindle, where we worked, basically we took the context as the starting point. So we have this kind of national issue, supply can't meet demand in healthcare services, and patients are increasingly being asked to self-manage in the community, more so now during the pandemic. But supporting people to do that is not an easy thing, to activate patients, to empower them to manage their own health. And this is particularly an issue with complex comorbidities, so people with long-term physical health conditions who very often have overlapping mental health needs as well. So we thought, right, so we can't physically put health professionals in people's homes. What could we do then? What might be an idea? So we thought, having worked with computer science colleagues a lot, we could create a virtual human. We could create an avatar that people can have in their homes that might support them. So we had this hypothesis: would this virtual human in someone's home be useful, or would it be something that people really don't want? So we started with that idea. And because I'm a psychologist by background, I wasn't so much interested in that toy, that virtual human, the avatar thing. I was more interested in the human experience of that. And with other projects that I've conducted, we come across barriers a lot that people talk about to do with trust. Who's created this product or service? What for? Where's the data going? Ethical issues around having maybe something in people's homes. They feel like they might be being watched, or decisions about their care might be made based on their interactions with the technology. So there's a lot of trust and ethical issues that keep coming up with user research, and also this digital divide whereby a lot of people that maybe don't have the technical skills at the moment to use tech, or the money to buy different things, or that they just don't want to be told, this is your option now, we're taking away the human. There's a lot of the issues there with the digital divide. So we wanted to kind of look into all of that. So we chose chronic lung disease as the focus, as the kind of patient group we wanted to work with, because there's so much overlap between the physical and emotional symptoms there. And so I work with the British Lung Foundation, Breathe Easy groups. And like Joe was saying, this is really, working with people in this way takes a huge amount of time and investment, because if you want to access harder to reach people within that population, you need to put the work in, you need to go to groups, you need to volunteer to give presentations and support people. And I went to loads of singing groups and fun runs, and really got involved in that community, because we're asking people to give up their time to share their thoughts with us. So it took a lot of time and investment to get people together. But we ran 2 workshops. Ultimately, the first one you can see here is one of the activities in that first workshop, where we brought together patients and health professionals. So we had a psychologist, an occupational therapist, pulmonary nurse, the mix of health professionals there. So we wanted to look at a day in the life of people. So we kind of ran that activity and provided people different materials to map a day in their life, from when they wake up to when they go to bed, and then through the night, and what kind of things were happening for them, and what do people find challenging. during that time, because we didn't want to just assume that if people are struggling with mental health, an app that monitors symptoms and gives them some CBT would be the solution for them. So we did that, and then we did an activity called Missing Sentences, where we gave people the start of lots of different sentences. So I wish, it's good that, and so we could start to map out their journey from diagnosis as well with their chronic lung disease to where they are now and things that they wish they'd had. And so we use all these different tools to start to piece together what needs people have. And then we also presented them with different avatars. So we showed them Mark Zuckerberg's Jarvis and, you know, kind of pie in the sky, Baymax from Big Hero 6, the kind of inflatable robot. We gave them loads of different things to look at and critique. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So then ultimately come up with this basis for the avatar. People said they wanted a human as opposed to an animal type figure. They wanted to be able to personalize that. They wanted it to be professional, but not clinical. They wanted a regional accent. They wanted a two-way conversation. So this is one of the things as well. They didn't want an avatar that could be in their home that would just give them information. They wanted an actual conversation with this avatar. So we start picking out some of the features that people wanted. And in terms of scenarios, they came up with 4 that they thought would be really, really useful for them. So they wanted, at the point of diagnosis, they wanted something that would provide them with information so that they could gain more knowledge about their condition, about their medications, that kind of thing. And then have something that they could, obviously here you can see they wanted things on a computer, on their television, but also something that they could take to appointments that might record what was said, because we know that people don't remember half of what's said during appointments. So they wanted that. They wanted something that they could use in a kind of crisis acute mode when they were having either a panic attack or they were very short of breath. They wanted that panic mode element. And then they wanted motivation and emotional support. So they gave us these examples that we could start to construct the features of the avatar with. Can I have the next slide, please? So we started with all that, and then we had a second workshop where we created masks. And I don't know if Joe's seen this before with his colleagues at Lab for Living. Kind of people act out what the avatar will do. So in this way, then we started to see that people in the group wanted that peer interaction. So the voice and the script that we would feed into the AI would actually be a peer interaction. And in this second workshop, people created scripts basically for the 4 scenarios and what they would want to hear in that situation. So we created these scripts and content based on that, coupled with obviously clinical information and the actual advice and things like that. So we then knew we couldn't, obviously we're not Facebook, so we couldn't create this all singing, all dancing AI agent with the money that we had. So we Wizard of Oz'd it, and we fed this AI system with the information that we had and created a film that we could then show a whole group of like novel patients and get their feedback on that. So you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a gentleman called Terry. He acted in the film and interacted with Ava, character that we created, and we shot in the Catch Home Lab, Centre for Assistive Technology and Connected Healthcare, which is set up like a home. So we've got a bedroom area, we've got a kitchen and a living room. So we shot his interactions with Ava on the television and the tablet and the smart speaker. And we then showed that to a new group of people. And what came out for me from all of that, they had recommendations again, and there would be new reiterations of that. People felt this would be really a great companionship tool as well for people living on their own. It could be something that offered a lot of reassurance during moments of panic. So there were loads of positives that came out of that. And nobody in any of the feedback sessions spoke about these issues to do with trust and ethics and digital divide, even though we were, asked about those kind of things. And I think, for me, one of the reasons why that didn't come up as it has done in other projects where we've looked at barriers is because this was created by people with COPD.
Yeah.
So, the reason for its development, the reason for it being there, what it was going to do, there was that trust there anyway. It was kind of vocalised, but also clear that this was something created by people.
Kat, I'm just aware of the time.
I know, I'll finish up now. So yeah, and the ethics as well.
It's a lovely place to pause.
But yeah, and like I say, this idea as well required very little digital literacy or competency. It was something that would be in someone's home that could support them in that way. So yes, that was the kind of take home for me.
That's such a lovely example, Kat, and I think we've got some really strong themes coming out here around trust and relationships, and the process being as important as what you produce. And Joe's put in the chat, it builds credibility, it builds provenance. So all of those things are really important. And thank you so much for everyone for sharing tools, particularly you, Joe. We can curate this chat and make it available afterwards, I think, so that we can show you some of those resources. Now, I'm aware we're running out of time, so what I'm going to do is we're going to pause on the Mindwave example, because we've shared quite a bit of our approach. And Chantel, if you could take us to the Miro board, we're just going to spend 5 or 10 minutes giving you an example, for those of you that haven't experienced it, about how we might actually use a Miro board in a workshop. And if you can see, if we maybe just go into the hunch and the brief. We've got a brief from Kate here, which is to think about how a web app might be able to help stroke survivors manage their health and well-being remotely during the pandemic. And we've got a hunch there, but this is a hunch that we need to test, which is that the impact of stroke results in physical limitations for many survivors, making it hard for them to get out and about, and making it hard for them to access health services. Now that might seem like a really common sense, well, yes, of course, that's the case. But through all the examples that Kate gave us, people make all sorts of assumptions that don't necessarily borne out to be true. So what I'm going to invite the panel to do, facilitated by Ilse, is just to spend a few minutes starting to unpick some of this and start to work out how we might understand this issue a little bit better. What we want to do here is start thinking about what some of the assumptions in the brief and what things haven't we considered, or what might we need to consider. So could I ask you, Kat and Joe, just to start sharing a few thoughts about the sort of things that we're making assumptions about in this brief, and Kate as well. And we can start to just show how you might go about putting things into a chat, putting things into the Miro board, sorry.
So I think for me, from looking at the brief, the first two major assumptions that are there are the fact that it's a digital solution, and then secondly, if it is a digital solution, the fact it's a web app. I think there's two things there that from our experiences in the few projects we've worked on with people who have survived stroke, the range of impacts and effects of stroke on people is vast. So some may be quite comfortable with using digital technology and others may not be. And I think that assumption that it should be a digital solution is one that I would kind of challenge straight away, that we should be developing this, thinking about it potentially being digital and or physical as well.
And as you say, Joe, we often start with a client or who has a brief or a research bid that requires us to come up with a product, but that is the wrong place to start. And even where our client or our research grant might require us to have a brief, we might still want to interrogate it and unpick it and really question whether that is the right solution. What about you, Kate? Is there anything you'd want to be challenging around that hunch, or thinking things that we might need to ask?
Well, I'm going to go back to my animal idea, just throw it in there. I agree that the assumptions that necessarily it's not necessarily a digital solution or a web app solution. I accept that, but and I also think that you know, for example, I think there's very little support out there in the community for people, and there's not a lot of people who are having the company. And I think there's a lot of loneliness out there, not having their families. So I think somehow to try and prevent some of these stroke survivors I'm talking specifically about from who are here as a cohort that are really slipping. They're really slipping because they're not able to, they're not seeing that they're going slowly and slowly downwards, and it's affecting their rehab, it's affecting their ability to move, to be independent, to take care of their personal needs. And I think well-being, you know, makes you feel demotivated, and that could have really big, and does have big consequences on people's health, and people going backwards. So I feel when I'm talking to people on these groups, then I'm getting very strong messages that the cohort of stroke survivors who will be like me, they will work really hard and they will see this as a challenge to overcome lockdown. But there's a vast number of people that I feel are slipping and becoming despondent, and somehow there's a need and an opportunity to maybe to give these lonely people some support and some encouragement, and there's some triggers to say that actually you're really slipping. You've really not got out of bed for 3 days now, and you've watched This Morning for a week, and you know, and it's just, you know, I just feel that there's those sorts of issues really.
Okay, well, I think what you're starting to do is really starting to get some nuance between, right, we've made a fairly broad sort of, we've got a broad brief, we've got a hunch, but just with your inputs, we're starting to realise this is a more nuanced conversation. It's about motivation, it's about loneliness, it's about isolation, it's about a ton of other things that are nothing to do with the hunch or the brief, but that we need to deeply sort of understand. So I just wonder if we can move it, and you can see that Ilse and Chantel, as we're talking about it, are capturing these things in post-it notes. I wonder whether we could just move down, Chantel, and start to think about that stakeholder map, because I think one of the complexities we often find within healthcare is the person who might be using something, accessing a service, might be different to the gatekeeper, which might be the clinician, which might also be different to the person who's going to buy it or who set the performance target. So we've got quite a complex, it's very different to in the consumer space where I want an app, I buy it, I use it. This is a very different and more complex environment. So we need to be thinking really clearly about who are the stakeholders. So could we just start to think about, in this scenario, we've obviously got people with lived experience of stroke, and within that we need to be thinking about self and her groups, about people that might be experiencing depression or loneliness, so we want it here in a broad way. But also I guess we have other stakeholders. So Kat, is there anyone you'd like to be putting into the stakeholder map from your point of view as an academic?
Well, I guess so. One of the things that comes across a lot for me when I'm working with people is the relationships with their family members. So we've got the actual survivor themselves, but then I'd be keen to involve maybe partners, anyone that's...
Can I just say, can you hear me? Sorry, Kat, am I interrupting you? That is absolutely vital, family members, but I'd also add in something to think about in terms of stakeholder. A lot of people who, for example, go to university, and a lot of them not even go to university, you get jobs around the country, you move away from family. The support person is that best friend. And, you know, they know you better than family because you've maybe lived away from them for 30 years. So it's somehow, I'm just adding to the point, I think.
So it's about informal relationships, about friendships, it's about your neighbour, it might be geographical, but it might be about who you connect with online. So again, we're starting to think in a really rich way about who those different stakeholders might be and who would help bring their contribution to help us think about this in a really nuanced and deep way.
And I guess as well, I think if we're thinking about how this, if it's going to be an app or digital, how this is going to impact for people and how it's going to get out there, then I'd be wanting to involve kind of major charity players in this field.
So you've got sort of civil society experts in the field who and groups that might actually represent or be membership organisations that might represent the interests of particular groups of people as well.
Yeah, and also maybe that's a channel whereby the app or product or service might get to people. It doesn't always have to be with, you know, that kind of.
So they might be the people that promote it that might actually stop it happening because they disagree with it, or so I think I'm gonna just ask, because I'm aware of the time and I just want to give everyone a chance to say a final few words. But I just wonder, Ilse and Chantal, if you could just sort of pull out so we can see the whole Miro board. But I think what we're trying to give you is a sense of how, when we're running an online workshop, we might facilitate people having a conversation, but then also be able to record the conversation in real time in a way that they can see, they can challenge, they can question, and it sort of gives a visual representation, but also something really lovely from an accountability point of view that you can create a PDF of, you can give it to people afterwards, you can show it to the client. And so I think having a Miro board, you know, we've talked about some of the limitations. It might not always be appropriate. There are other software platforms available. we're not having a kickback from Miro. It just happens to be the board that we're using. So you can see in the process, we might then start to move beyond. This is about planning the discovery. We would then enact it, do the workshops, and so on. So in the last few minutes, I just wonder whether we could, Chantal, just go to the penultimate slide. I just want to give people an opportunity in the panel just to say a final few words, and then what we'll do is we'll just talk a little bit about the next session. We're jumping around, aren't we? So Jo, a final thought from you. If we're taking anything away from this in terms of discovery, what would you want people to take away? One sentence, please.
I think involve people as much as you can, and don't make any assumptions about their lived experience, their habits and rituals, and even about how you can engage them in these processes of co-design. I think all of that should be something you negotiate with them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. Kate, what would you, in a sentence, what would be
One sentence.
Sentence.
Discovery to me is finding out what matters to you. That's it.
Brilliant. Lovely. Kat?
I can't remember what the question was now. My mind's gone blank, but I'm just going to say trust. Sorry, say that again a bit.
What's the most important thing that people need to take away from this?
Trust, I would say. It is very easy to break people's trust in technology and solutions, and it's very hard to get that trust, and it's a really important thing for us to be focused on.
I think that's a really important message. And also, from a design perspective, just thinking about all of the conversation we've had today, what's most resonated with you?
I would say empathy, and similarly to what Kat's just mentioned, you can't really build that empathy without trust. So relationships are really important, I think.
Yeah. Relationships, trust, participation. Lovely. Right. So session 2 is around that relationship between academia, the NHS and industry. Session 3 is around evidence and evaluation, and we're really pleased we've got representatives from NICE and, you know, great panels for all of these sessions. And then the final one is a real one that I really care about, which is onboarding and implementation. So it's all very well building this stuff, and doing the right discovery puts you in a really good position, but you have to think about what happens. Developing something is not an end in itself. So we're going to think about onboarding and implementation. I just want to finish up by saying thank you so much to our amazing panel. You've got my contact details here. We've got Kat's, Chantal's and Ilse's as well. You haven't seen Chantal, but she's been the person behind the scenes keeping an eye on all the technology and going through the slides for us. Please do give us some feedback. I think through the Eventbrite, Kat, we might be able to just send people a note and ask them for some feedback, because we'd really like to hear for future sessions about how we can improve improve them. We really appreciate all the conversation on the chat. It's been brilliant, and tons of resources shared on there. So yeah, thank you to Pitchin, thank you to John for doing the introduction, and thank you to the panel. Have a lovely day, and please you know, get in touch with us, keep the chat going, and good luck with all of your discovery and user research efforts. Thank you very much, everybody.